This is the first video of 22, giving a brief description of the 22 to-dos to do to restore the law. Number 1 is stop using sodium fluoride, G.M.O S and other known debilitating suppressants. You could go over to the study done by Harvard University into the neurotoxicity and developing children's brains of sodium fluoride, which was done in 2012. There's not any in the UK that I'm aware of that have found any negative effects, but that's because they've not done any studies to look into the negative effects, because they want to give you the perception that it's good because it causes ignorance, suppresses empathy. So obviously the suppression of empathy causes ignorance to the wants and needs of other people. There are multiple studies to be found on this if people bothered to investigate. Number 2 of the 22 to-dos is revert back to the creation diet and old natural health remedies. So what this means is turning away from vaccines, turning away from paracetamol, which is another empathy suppressing drug, as are most of them. And the creation diet, a brief example of this is, for example, not to eat pork, because if you look into the physiology and biology of these animals, they're similar to humans. So on the basis of when any trauma that they go through while they're alive, it gets stored into their bodies, which then makes the meat cancerous. Whereas if you look at chicken or fish, so birds and fish, they only have the amygdala part of the brain, which is basically the fight or flight survival instinct. So any trauma that they go through does not get stored in their bodies. So don't take my word for it, do your own investigations. Number 3 is learn the narcissistic traits, control, deceptions and abuse revelations. So a brief example of this is the psychological trauma that comes from emotional and psychological abuse from the narcissistic causes blocks, blind spots and triggers. So you've got adrenaline triggers and disassociation triggers. Obviously the adrenaline triggers release adrenaline, the disassociation triggers release cortisol. When these two chemicals are mixed, it then sort of whitewashes your memory and you become in a floaty, disassociative like state, and it makes you more susceptible to gaslighting and almost programmable. The narcissistic can pick up on empathic people's tells, so double blinking, for example. The only time I've ever known one make eye contact or keep eye contact is when they are watching for the tells. When they pick up on the tells, they further exploit them. So they do it on a basis of psychologically abusing you and gaslighting you over a long period of time until you finally react. Then they twist it and start to play victim, manipulating and triangulating everybody else to meet what they want them to have the perception of believing. And then the entire legal system uses the same psychological tactics too. So the triangulation between corporations, the moving the goalposts, the set up to fail scenarios, blaming each other's legislations to why you can't or are unable to do something, the denied accountability. The list goes on. I could probably talk about this for hours, but I'm not going to. People need to investigate for themselves and do the psychological block, blind spot and trigger work. All as therapy does is open up the trauma and leave you with unanswered questions. purposely for the reason of to hide the narcissistic abuse. Then you've got the family destroying narcissistic social services who side with the narcissistic parents or families. Narcissistic family members, parents is a legal term, as is children, but I'll get to that later. Number 4 is learn the law versus the legal fraud deceptions, and that's including the deceptive legalese language. So legalese is basically the same spelling as the English language. However, when you are communicating with somebody who works for the legal system, they are actually speaking legalese. So if you look that up, you will see how they deceive you to consent to trade under your trust name in capitals. It's legal fraud, legal entrapment. So the legal system works on the basis of no accountability or denied accountability. Nobody ever signs anything anymore, and this is because it's fraud. So unless you have video evidence of them, for example, handing you a letter or an advocate, then you don't have any evidence of their corruption. If you were to take the blatantly bogus paperwork to a court of law, they could twist it on you and say that's so bad that you could have printed it off yourself. So instead of saying understand, which actually means standing under the authority of, you should say I comprehend. So you can now see why the last question a policeman asks you before arresting you is, do you understand? When you reply yes, you are telling him that you stand under his authority. Then you've got words such as citizen or civilian, and citizenship for admiral law, birthed, like ships are birthed, the birth certificate when you're actually born. So you should be saying a member of the public and rather than a civilian. Then you've got civil servants who should be public servants, but they pick and choose when, as it suits them, to which position they jump in between. Then you've got master, Mr, Miss, are all legally entrapping titles that are attached to the person rather than the man and the woman. Children or kids should be referred to as your issue or property. And then you've got obviously the physical property, goods and assets are also referred to as property. And then there's words such as suffer. If you're using the word suffer, you are telling them that you've consented to it, so you should be using the word under duress. There's too many others to list, but obviously, as I said before, people need to do their own investigations. Don't take my word for it. Do not take a policeman's word for it. Do not take the court's word for it, because they are all in collusion and complicit in this legal fraud. Five is learn the threefold Cestui Que Act 1666. Law, financial and status debilitations. So the law is debilitations when they deem you dead at sea, and they then label you birthed rather than born, and that's for the admiral law. So the Cestui Que Act 1666 covertly revokes your right to law, and that's been going on for the past 350 years, which is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for people to comprehend. And then you've got the status, so rather than being acknowledged as a man or a woman, you accept the legal title of Mr, Master, Miss, Mrs. For men, you are called Master up until the age of 13, and what this does is removes the letters of estate from Master, leaving you with Mr. 6 years after you've turned 7. So what that does is lets the authorities know that you've missed your chance to reclaim your estate and do not know the law. Then you've got the financial debilitation. So as the living men and women, you would be entitled to live off the bonds of equity from these trust accounts. However, they obviously withhold it diversely because they deem you dead at sea. And it sounds unbelievable, but they do the unbelievable to make the honest sound it. So every time, say for example, a policeman stops you, gives you an on-the-spot fine, they then extort XYZ amount of finance from your trust account in bonds of equity. So that's the same for gas, electricity. It's all paid for with your trust account. They then deceive you to pay again with your hard-earned money. Obviously, it's withheld diversely, and this is what's funding the corruption. It's also what's used as a leverage to have the social services. They have these quotas to meet by each year, so they have a certain amount of money to extort from these withheld trust accounts, and the way they do this is by prolonging court cases, which is also a way of psychologically debilitating and exhausting the empathic parents, all to result in what they had planned in the first place, which is leave the children issue with the narcissistic parents. And yes, so this is basically what's funding all corruption, is them extorting the bonds of equity from your trust account. So this is the threefold deception. You've also got the 3 cities, so the City of London, the Vatican, and the Federal Reserve within Washington DC, all leading up to the One World Order, One World Government, New World Order. City of London, One World Universal Law. The Vatican, One World Religion, and obviously the One World Finance, cryptocurrency. I'll leave it there, but if you want to look into things, and you'll start to comprehend why we are going cashless, and why we've got this orchestrated cost of living crisis. And for any police out there, you might want to start asking the question as to where your pensions have gone. And the majority of you, if any, are probably unaware that it's not in existence anymore. This is all done via the Phoenix fraud, which is, well, I'll let you investigate that for yourself.